Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another episode of the Logan Blackman Show. I hope you all had a fantastic couple weeks. I do apologize once again for being a little bit delayed on the YouTube videos. We did have a video that was scheduled to come out last week where I was going to go over each of the top 5 quarterbacks. Remember, we did the top 5 quarterbacks in each Power 4 conference. I was going to go through each Power 4 conference again with the same quarterbacks and go through the top 3 games that each quarterback will be playing this year, or games to look out for. It doesn't necessarily mean the toughest team they'll play, but it's just an interesting matchup for each of those quarterbacks. But I just had no time to edit it. The video ended up being, recording it ended up being an hour long, so I was just like, I don't have the time to edit it. I want to get this done, but it's just not in the cards for me because I needed to get the State of Iowa preview stuff done. And this one, as you can tell by the title, is the first time this team's been episode 1, but they're the first team to play this season as they take on Kansas State on Saturday in Ireland. It is the Iowa State Cyclones. I am really excited to do this video. Despite not being an Iowa State fan myself and being an Iowa Hawkeye fan, you could see that there's some, some trials and tribulations that comes with this, but I always like to think of myself as being as partial as possible, or someone who's not as biased as possible, because I know some fans, when it comes to rivalries and stuff like that, it's really hard to talk about your team's biggest rival, especially when they're in the state, especially when you live in a town that's 20 minutes away from the city that houses the school, Iowa State University. But this is a team that's coming out their first 10-win season in program history. There were 3 teams out of the Power 4, Power 5 conferences that had never had a 10-win season. 2 of them got 10-win seasons last year, and that was Iowa State and Indiana. The only team that has yet to do that is the Vanderbilt Commodores. But if you listen to anything Diego Pavia said so far this offseason, national championship is the standard for Vanderbilt. That's the standard. It's not the expectation. That's the stand. That's what we're doing. That's everything we're doing is to win a national championship. And Iowa State this year has had some interesting things happen to them. Both wide receiver 1s and 2s from last year in the forms of Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins are both gone. This was a team last year that had 2,000-yard wide receivers. They were one of 2 teams in all of college football to do so, and the other one was Ohio State, who had Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith. And Jeremiah Smith, as we know, is one of the best receivers, probably the best player in college football. And Emeka Egbuka was a first-round draft pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jaden Higgins and Knoll both wound up with the Houston Texans. Higgins going in the 2nd round, Knoll going into the 3rd round. So how they're going to replace them is going to be very interesting. You got Chase Sowell in from East Carolina and Xavier Townsend from UCF, who has a previous relationship with Rocco Becht. But what's very interesting about the first depth chart Iowa State released is that those 2 guys who, by all accounts this offseason, were 2 guys that were seen as very good gets for Iowa State. They didn't put up monster numbers so far throughout their collegiate careers, but 2 players that you could see the ceilings there, especially with Xavier Townsend, who could be that Jalen Knoll player in this offense, and Sowell being the bigger guy out of the 2 receivers who had a couple 600-yard seasons at East Carolina, was the 2nd leading receiver there last year. But the top 2 guys on the depth chart right now are Dominic Overby and Eli Green, 2 guys that, again, have been on the roster before, but with these 2 guys coming in, you were like, okay, these are going to be the 2 main guys at the receiver card. So you can't just go out there and replace like that 2 guys that got over 1,000 yards receiving. Again, they were one of 2 teams throughout all of college football in the FBS level, I should say, because I haven't checked FCS D1, D2, and NAIA. I should have fact checked before that, but in the FBS level at least, those were it. And the running back room is very solid. Abu Sama, who 2 years ago or before last season you would thought was going to be the main guy in the backfield, as he had that 200-plus yard rushing game against Kansas State in the last game of the regular season. And he's going into the year being the main guy. And it's like, okay, this is Iowa State's new version of Breece Hall and Brock Purdy. We'll get to the quarterback here in a little bit. But Abu Sama didn't really get the numbers that we were expecting this year. Carson Hansen kind of, at least from my perspective, I could be reading the room wrong. Carson Hansen wasn't somebody that I really looked at going like, oh, he's going to challenge Abu Sama for the starting job. Like, if you looked at me this time last year and said that Iowa would have the guy that rushed for a shit ton of yards and Iowa State had the platoon back system, I would have called you crazy, because it kind of seemed like it would have been flipped, because Iowa had Kamari Mullen, Jazz Patterson, Williams, and obviously Caleb Johnson. And Abu Sama just didn't put up the numbers last year. There were times he would just get taken completely out of the game. Jackson would come in as a little scat back in there. But Carson Hansen put up really solid numbers last year. Iowa State runs 2 tight ends as well. They're both extremely solid. The offensive line continues to improve there as well. And Rocco Becht, the main guy, the main catalyst in this offense, is now entering year 3 as the starter. He's got Moser in as the offensive coordinator back-to-back years. This is the first time, weirdly enough, in Rocco Becht's 3 years starting, this is the first time where he's had an offensive coordinator stay from the previous season. Because remember, his first year as a starter, Nate Scheelhaus was the offensive coordinator. He ended up going to the Los Angeles Rams. Moser got promoted within, and then he put forth, again, an offense that helped get the first 10-win season in program history. But Rocco Rocco Becht puts up very, very good numbers. 3,500 yards passing last year, I believe 25 touchdowns in there, 8 interceptions or something there. He's not the biggest dude in the world or the most physically imposing dude in the world, but he throws a really good deep ball. It's one of the prettiest deep balls you're going to see in college football. He's a good athlete in there as well. I'm not going to sit here and act like he's a Lenore Sellers or something like that, but he's a very good athlete who can make plays in the run game when required. But the thing with Rocco Becht, and the numbers are there. Like, again, 3,500 yards, 25 touchdowns. But with Rocco Becht last year, it felt like in some games that they played, he wasn't playing a full game or complete game, where we'd see him kind of like struggle to get into the game or trying to find a rhythm into the game. But as the end went on, then he's making big plays. You look at the game against UCF as a prime example of that, where he's kind of struggling, middling his way through the game, but then puts forth the drive and gets a quarterback sneak touchdown to ultimately win the game there. But you look at games against like Iowa, against Baylor, Kansas State, he didn't put forth great numbers in that game. Against Kansas, he didn't really play great. Like, there were some games this year where the numbers are there. The numbers are there. You can look at the numbers on a sheet of paper and go, yes, those are good numbers, minus the Kansas State game. He didn't throw any interceptions, but I think he went like 13 of 35 or something like that. But he didn't throw any interceptions, had 2 touchdowns. So you can take that with a pinch of salt, I guess. But Rocco Becht is one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12, and that's a nice little safety net for Iowa State, that being one of the teams that has a returning starter. And then the Big 12's got a good amount of quarterbacks returning, but if you look at the grand scheme of college football, there's some new blood in and around college football. And Rocco Becht being there for now the 3rd year, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in college football in regards to staying in the same system for his entire career. He's another version of Brock Purdy, I guess. They're not the exact same player or anything like that, but Rocco Becht has been talked about by some people, not myself, of being a potential first-round draft pick. We'll have to wait and see how that goes this season. This season will be telling, with a whole new receiving core, with no Jalen Nolan, no Jaden Higgins, how he does there. And Iowa State defensively, John Heacock is still there, so they're going to have a top defense. They're a better pass defense historically than a run defense. That's what you get with a 3-3-5 defense. You're naturally, you have less people in the box, so you're naturally going to be a better pass team than a run team. But Iowa State, their defensive line last year was not great, which was kind of one of the nervous parts going into the season, that there wasn't a lot of experience there, or there were some question marks around that position. The linebacking core got banged up all freaking season long, but you got 4 new faces on the defensive line this offseason. You got Dominique Orange still there as one of the better interior forces in all the Big 12. And then your linebacking core, you got Cooper Abel still there, Will McLaughlin's back, and Caleb Bacon, who played 6 plays last year in the first game against North Dakota and had his season taken away from him just like that. I believe it was on a special teams play as well. But having those guys back, and you would expect it to be a more improved unit than what we saw last year. And in the secondary, yes, you lost some big pieces. Verdon's gone. Porter's gone at corner, but Iowa State still has some very good. Bo Fraley's another player that's gone, but you've still got Jeremiah Cooper, who's one of the better defensive backs in the Big 12 as well. And you also got Jontez Williams, who had 4 interceptions last year, and both Cooper and Williams were on the Jim Thorpe Award watch list, so that's very impressive that Iowa State was able to get 2 of those guys in this offseason. And again, Iowa State overall is a good team. The run defense, I'm still going to need to wait and see on that, because if you look at the game against Arizona State as a prime example, they sold out so much to the run. Like, I remember the 4th down conversion early on in the game, which was kind of like a tone setter for the rest of that game. The run defense needs to improve this year if Iowa State's going to maintain the success that they had last year. You get a first 10-win season in program history, and you look at some of the other schools that kind of, quote-unquote, I wouldn't say Iowa State surprised people last year, but when you look at 10-win seasons, I don't know if a lot of people thought they would make the Big 12 title game or be a game away from making the college football playoff. And then they beat Miami in the Pop-Tart Bowl as well, and they're opening the season with a team that's also won the Pop-Tart Bowl in Kansas State, like we talked about before. The first game of the season in Ireland, week 0. Avery Johnson, much like Rocco Becht, is widely considered to be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12. Physically gifted, 6'3", about 190 pounds, so he's a little bit of a leaner guy, but he has a strong arm and he's really mobile. Those quarterback sweeps and RPOs that Kansas State runs are very effective. He's the returning leading rusher from the team from last season. DJ Giddens is gone, so it's going to be interesting to see how Kansas State replaces him there in the backfield. It's going to be a lot easier said than done. And receiver Jace Brown is back as well, but your other 4 leading receivers from last year are all gone. So there's going to be some interesting pieces and see how Kansas State does here. The offensive line's back. The offensive line, both teams are returning their main cogs along the offensive line. And Avery Johnson, 25 touchdowns, I think 10 interceptions last year. He has all the physical tools to be a very, very good quarterback. He's just wildly inconsistent. There's a reason they chose him over Will Howard, who went on to win a national championship game at Ohio State. There was a reason for that. And Will Howard was a good quarterback for Kansas State, but Avery Johnson's ceiling is just higher. It's just, you just look at the skill set that he has. There's just not that consistency there yet. Now, I should have mentioned this, but they do have 2 new starters on each tackle spot, but they're experienced guys as well, so I think that's big. Even though they're new to the unit itself, I do think having 2 guys who have experience at the FBS level, high-level FBS level, I think is a big get for Kansas State in keeping this offensive line and running game intact from last season. And their defensive line is very impressive. Now, Ma is gone. Now, he did have 8 or 9 sacks this past season, so that's going to be big, but the defensive line is still one of the strongest units on this Kansas State team. They had the second best rush defense in the conference last season. And you got Austin Romaine on the defense. You got a bigger secondary as well. So I'm going to be intrigued to see how they match up with the speed of players like Townsend in there. But the defensive line with that consistency there, even though again, Mott's gone, I am intrigued to see how Iowa State handles the run game, because you don't want to be a one-dimensional team. You cannot afford to be a one-dimensional team in this game, and especially with Matt Campbell, who's somebody who doesn't really like to show his hand early on last season. I mean, you look at the North Dakota game last year, the game we talked about earlier, they scored in their opening drive in 2 plays. 2 bombs down the field. And then they slowed down, they won 21-3. Like, Matt Campbell's not somebody that's really going to open up the gate and come out absolutely guns blazing, but you can't afford to come out slow against Kansas State. And I know he has a good record against Chris Klieman. I think he's 4-2 all time against Chris Klieman while he's at Kansas State. I think he's won 4 of the last 5 games there as well. They won last year. They won in the snow game in Manhattan, Kansas as well when Will Howard was the starter there. That was the insane Abu Sama game. But this game, given the history of Matt Campbell in week 1, I guess this is week 0, so we haven't seen that yet, where he doesn't like to show too much, I do think that may come back to bite him. I don't know, and I know there's some interesting pieces for Kansas State, the running back position and the receiver spots, but I am going to have the Wildcats winning this game, so Iowa State starts off 0-1, but then we go into the game against South Dakota, who were the 4th seed in the FCS playoffs last year. They finished 11-3, and you brought Aiden Bowman back as the starter. This is his technical 4th year as the starter. I know he's 3rd as a full-time starter there, but he's one of the best passers in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, and having a consistent presence at quarterback is big if you want to keep continuing to battle in the toughest conference in the FCS. And he's a former Iowa State guy. He's a former Iowa State player, so he didn't play at Iowa State, but there's some blood there, so maybe Aiden Bowman comes out absolutely guns blazing and beats the shit out of the Cyclones, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But the main thing is, and there's no secret that I think Iowa State's going to win this game, but just to push in, you got a new head coach at South Dakota. You got 4 new starters in the offensive line. Your top 2 receivers are gone. I believe their top 1 or 2 running backs are gone as well. I meant top tight end, not running back. Charles Pierre is back, 1,200 yards rushing last season. You have a top 7 defense in the FCS level last year, but again, they're a good FCS team. They're a very, very good team. They're one of the upper echelon teams at that level, but Iowa State will have no problems here, and I'm going to say Iowa State wins, so they're going 1-1 to kick off the season. Next game, week 2 against Iowa. Iowa has not lost in Ames since 2011, so it's been a while since Iowa State's gotten a dub in Iowa City. It took a while for Matt Campbell to get a dub against Iowa overall anyways, but the pair have been alternating wins back and forth throughout the past couple seasons. Iowa State won the game last year. Iowa kind of handed the game to them. Like, if you told me at halftime of that game that Iowa was going to lose that game, I would have looked at you a little weird, because Iowa just looked completely in control. And then the interception happened at right after halftime with Cade McNamara. And then you have the Jalen Knoll touchdown. Obviously, you have the 50-something yard kick to win it by a freshman. So that kind of was a nice little kick in the nuts there at Kinnick. But in the pair of alternating, the last 2 wins for Iowa State against Iowa have been in Kinnick. The last win Iowa had against Iowa State was in Ames. And Iowa, I'm going to talk about them more when we do the State of Iowa preview for them, so I'm not going to touch on it too much here. All I'll really say about Iowa is that I'm intrigued to see how they do with the running back room. We got Kamari Moulton and Jazz Patterson, how they replace Caleb Johnson. The offensive line's very good. Mark Granowski got named the starter, which is complete. I was not expecting that at all. The receivers, I like the receivers. They're not like world beaters or anything, but like Reese Vandersee, Caleb Gill, Wheatchin, they have good receivers. I don't know, Strenga at tight end. The defensive line's good with Herkett and Graves. The secondary scares me, I'm not going to lie. And I think that speed that Iowa State has could cause some problems. And Iowa's got a new linebacker room as well, with both guys last year, Nick Jackson and Jay Higgins, both gone, who were like stalwarts in that defense. I have no issue with Phil Parker replacing guys, because he's always done a good job of replacing linebackers and replacing players. But I do think Iowa State gets the win against Iowa. I think that game against Kansas State will be a big tell on what happens in this game, because I don't really think it matters how good either team is going into this game, because of the fact it's just so heated. Like, my prediction for this is if Iowa State beats Kansas State, I think Iowa beats them. But if they lose to Kansas State, I think they'll beat Iowa. So in this prediction, I have Kansas State beating Iowa State, sorry. So I'm going to have Iowa State beating Iowa in this. Next game, week 4, is at Arkansas State. So a home and home game. They absolutely beat the shit out of the Red Wolves last year when they came up. They put up 51 points against them last year or something like that. And they have 5 returning starters on the team, but they brought in like 34 or 35 transfers this offseason. They finished 8-5 last year. They're a very good offensive team. Jalen Rayner is a very solid quarterback at that level, and Corey Rucker's a good receiver, but they're a terrible defense. They're not very good on defense. We said that last year when we talked about this game. Iowa State, I know the last time they went on the road against a non-Power 4 conference team, they lost that game. Remember when they lost to Ohio? I don't think they're going to have similar issues here. And this is week 3, technically. I guess I'm still lost with the week 0 thing. So Iowa State going into the bye in week 4 will start the season 3-1. And at least that's how I'm looking at it right now. And the week 5 is at home against Arizona. And Arizona's a team that I kind of like. I'm not saying that they're going to go out there and be an amazing team or anything like that or challenge for a Big 12 title, but I really like Noah Fifita at quarterback. Now, Tedero and McMillan being gone is going to be massive, but they do have 2 solid receivers coming in. They have 9 returners coming back on defense, but they finished 4-8 last year, and they were a team that a lot of people, including myself, thought would do a lot better in the transition period to the Big 12 conference. Like, if you'd have told me last year that Arizona and Utah would have a harder time fitting into the Big 12 than Arizona State and Colorado, I would have probably looked at you a little crazy, but I like Noah Fifita, but I just think Iowa State's too much for them in this game, especially with it being at home, following a bye after a tough road game against Arkansas State. I'm going to have the Cyclones win here, so this is 4-1 to kick off the season. And then week 6, you go to Cincinnati. You got the Chili Bowl, I think is what they call this. And you obviously got Skyline Chili and all that, and I've talked to people around the state, like, people talk about the cinnamon roll and chili thing. Maybe it's just not a Central Iowa thing, but the cinnamon roll and chili thing is just not real. I am not believing that that's a real thing that people actually consume. People say they'd get it at school lunches. I never got that, and if I did, I've completely wiped it away from my memory. I might need to try it this year because I've heard about it. I've heard it's good. I remember asking a friend last year, what else do you have with chili? Like, it's some ridiculous question that I'm asking. Like, you had cinnamon rolls and chili. Well, what else do you have with chili? I don't know. A cracker. Saltine crackers or something like that. Not a cinnamon roll. Oh, whatever. But they're going to Cincinnati. We kind of talked about Cincinnati in the quarterback preview thing with Brendan Sorsby, who I really like. I think he's a very physically talented quarterback. 6'3", about 230 in there as well. Can move. Tries to run people over a little too much for my liking, but has a good arm in there. Cincinnati was a weird team. We talked about them going 5-2 to kick off the season. End of the season finishing 5-7. I was stuck going back and forth with like, oh, am I going to say they're what they finished as or how many games they lost? But they lost 5 games to end the season. Inconsistencies marred them throughout the entire course of the season. But Corey Kiner being gone is a massive loss. They did bring in Tyree Walker from Wisconsin, who put up about 800-something yards last season for the Badgers. And Brendan Sorsby in this game last year against Iowa State put up damn near 150 yards on the ground. I think he had 143 or something like that. So he's a very good athlete and took apart some of the gaps Iowa State had on their defense in the run game. But in this game, yes, and I like Dante Corleone in there as well on the defensive line. He's one of the better defensive linemen in the conference, but I think they'll improve. I think Cincinnati will be a better team than what they were last year, but I'm going to go with Iowa State in here. This one, so kicking off the season, this is 5-1. I believe in the next game, right back on the road. No bye week, no home game in between. You're going to the mountains to take on Colorado, and this game's trickier than what I think some people out there are giving it credit for because Colorado is not really seen as a team that's going to be pushing for the Big 12 title this year because of likes of Shedeur Sanders leaving, Travis Hunter leaving, Jimmy Horn's gone as well. The offensive line wasn't great last year. You had no run game. I think they averaged like 65 yards a game on the ground, which is horrendous. Like, that's as bad as it gets. But this game being on the road in Colorado, that makes it really tough. And I like Caden Salter. I don't know if they've announced the quarterback yet because it's between Caden Salter and Julian Lewis. If they want to run the ball, I think Caden Salter would be the guy, even though there's a lot of hype surrounding Julian Lewis because he was a 5-star, and then he got demoted to 4-star when he committed to Colorado because he was going to USC originally and then committed to Colorado. But Caden Salter was a very, very good quarterback for Liberty. He didn't put up great numbers last year comparatively to what he had in the previous years, but he's very experienced and a good athlete in the running back and at the quarterback position as well. So I think that'd be a nice little element to add to that offense. With Shedeur Sanders was not a runner. He wasn't a bad athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but he wasn't a guy who was going to run. Kaden Salter, I think, is a more effective runner than Sanders. I'm intrigued again who they end up going with at that quarterback position. And they've got 3 new starters coming on the offensive line. They brought in Xavier Hill this offseason to fill up one of the guard spots. We already talked about some of the receivers are gone, so it's going to be intriguing to see how they do there at that position. And you brought in Reginald Hughes from Jacksonville State, who was formerly at Ole Miss. He had like 4 sacks last year, 85 tackles or something like that. You also got DJ McKinney on the defensive side of the ball. Is probably the best returning defensive player that they have. And again, this is a game where I think it's a little bit tougher than what we're initially expecting, because Colorado's not a team that you're thinking of that's going to challenge for a Big 12 title. It's not in the Baylors, the Iowa States, the Arizona States, Kansas States, the Utahs, the Texas. I mean, the Big 12 is just a giant mess. You could tell me anybody who's going to win, I wouldn't be too surprised this year. But I am going to have Colorado winning this game. I think back-to-back road games for Iowa State, traveling to the mountains in Colorado, I am going to say Colorado comes away with a surprise win. And Iowa State seems to have 1 or 2 of those games since Matt Campbell's been there. Like before, it was like they're the team upsetting, but now they're the hunted at this point in time in the Big 12. And you had the game against Kansas last year, so maybe there's going to be one of those games where they slip up. They didn't play great against UCF like we talked about last year, but I'm going to have Colorado win in a surprise win against the Cyclones on the road. And then week 8, they're back at home against BYU, a team that finished 11-2 last year, who beat the crap out of Colorado in the Alamo Bowl. A Big 12 matchup in a bowl game I wasn't really expecting last year, but Jake Retzlaff is the big minus from this squad. Kicked out of the university, transferred to Tulane this offseason to compete with the boy, Brendan Sullivan, down there, because remember, Darian Mensah ended up transferring to Duke, and we won't talk about Duke, I guess. I was thinking are we going to talk about Duke? We're not going to do that. But Bear Bachmeier, brother of Hank Bachmeier, formerly of Boise State and Wake Forest, had just got named the starter. He transferred from Stanford. If I remember right, he's the first true freshman to start week 1 for BYU, but the problem is he wears number 47. I'm all about like the weird numbers, but I remember when Devin Gardner wore 98 and you got Devin Brown wearing 33, which I think is the main reason why he never played at Ohio State, and the main reason why I know he changed his number at Cal to start new, but that's why he didn't get that job, because coach looked at me, you wore 33 as a quarterback. I can't let you start in my offense. So he's on the bench for a true freshman there. But Bear Bachmeier, I'm intrigued to see how he does, because that was kind of like a giant wrench into everything BYU was doing, that Jake Retzlaff is leaving the program, and having guys that had not had any real experience up to this point was a very nervy thing. So quarterback's the most important position in the field. And you lose one like that can make things a little bit more stressful going into the season. We'll see how Bear Bachmeier does at this point to start the season off for them. And then what's good for him, Chase Roberts at wide receiver is back as one of the better receivers in the Big 12. They had a solid pass defense last year. I think they had the second best defense in the conference behind Iowa State. And you also got a decent linebacking core in there as well, which could make things interesting. You're running, LJ Roberts is back at running back. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of team BYU trots out this year. I have a very hard time believing they're going to be as good as what we saw last year, finishing 11-2. So I'm going to have Iowa State win this game at home, back at home, bouncing back from the Colorado game. A lot of emotion going into that game against the Cougars after coming off their first loss since week 0 against Kansas State. Well, the next one, week 9, is against the Arizona State Sun Devils, a team that absolutely had their way with the Cyclones in the Big 12 championship game last year. They did not have Jordan Tyson, but Cam Scadaboo was in there, so it's going to be intriguing to see how Arizona State does without Cam Scadaboo, who is one of the main stories in college football. And I'm intrigued to see how he does in the NFL at the New York Giants this offseason, compete with Tyrone Tracy for the running back 1 job. I think Devin Singletary's still there as well, but Sam Leavitt, if you were asking me to rank the quarterbacks in the Big 12, I would say Sam Leavitt is the best quarterback in the conference. And I say Jordan Tyson, I almost said Jordan Travis. I had to correct my brain there, but Jordan Tyson is one of the, if not the best receiver in the Big 12, and he's probably the best receiver going into the draft this year. And before you say anything, Ryan Williams and Jeremiah Smith cannot come out this year. So it's Jordan Tyson. You're probably looking at like Antonio Williams from Clemson as being the top 2 guys at this point in time. That's obviously subject to change, but I think those 2 guys, Leavitt and Tyson, are very big problems for the Cyclones. And again, like we talked about replacing Cam Scadaboo, you brought in Kanye Udo from Army, 1,000+ yard rusher last year, which I didn't know. I never really thought about Army players transferring. I never really thought about that before, but him transferring to Arizona State could be a big thing there. But replacing Scadaboo is a lot easier said than done. We talked about that before with Iowa. It's hard to replace a guy who is that important to your offense because Scadaboo was not only the leading rusher, he was the second leading receiver on the team as well. So that kind of gets lost on some of these takes, but that's going to be a very hard thing to replace. A lot easier, again, said than done. And they do have 9 returning starters coming back on the defense. Most of their biggest strength is in the secondary. I think they got 8 returning on offense, but with this game being at home, I'm sure it's going to be a night game. I'm sure Iowa State's going to be rocking the black uniforms. This game's going to have so much juice in it, and I think Iowa State, given how bad they looked last year against Arizona State, I think they rectify it, and I'm going to take Iowa State getting a dub over the Sun Devils in this game at home at Jack Trice. Then you got a bye week, and then week 10, I think. Week 10, I can't remember the exact week number here. It'll be on the screen somewhere, but it's against TCU at TCU. One of the better passing attacks in the conference. Josh Hoover, one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12. And the Big 12's got a good run of quarterbacks in here. Like we talked about Levitt. I like Salter, Beck, Avery Johnson. We talk about Brennan Sorsby. You got Morton at Texas Tech. You got Hoover at TCU. Sawyer Robertson, who's awesome for Baylor. Like, there's just a lot of really solid quarterback play in the Big 12. And Josh Hoover, I believe, led the conference in passing yards last year. If I'm wrong, I'll put that on the screen somewhere. But I believe he led the conference in passing yards last year. I don't know what's going on with the social media stuff. I'm not going to comment on that, but it's been going around like crazy recently, but very good quarterback in the Big 12, and he'll challenge Iowa State a lot in this game. And Eric McAllister, he's back. He was our leading receiver last year. And they got Jordan Dwyer coming in from Idaho. He had 1,100 yards last year, and I think his nice addition will place Beck at the receiver core. Back, I can't remember how to pronounce his name, but he's a massive loss for this offense. So having a guy come in from Idaho, yes, from the FCS level, but a 1,000-yard receiver there could be a nice little addition to the offense to replace your by far best receiver who left this past offseason. And I know their rush offense is not great. Their leading rusher didn't even have 450 yards rushing last year, or maybe 500. I'll put 500 because I can't remember if it's less than 450 or just above 450. I can't remember, but they don't have a great rush offense, so that could play into the factor with Iowa State in this game as well. And they've got a very good passing defense. Bud Clark's one of the better safeties in the conference. They got a good linebacking core in there as well. And yes, I know there's a bye in there, but how much energy they exert against Arizona State and how much emotion will be into that game. Like, there's always the drop-off game. And yes, there's, again, a bye week in there, but it's going to be hard to level out after that. So I am going to have TCU upsetting the Cyclones on the road. So there's another loss for the Cyclones that leads their losses up to 3. I'll put their record on the screen at this point. But yeah, I'm going to have a tough loss against TCU at this point in the season. And I lied. I was wrong. There's a bye after the TCU game, not before the TCU game. So even more reason for the drop-off right after that. But the final 2 games of the season, you've got Kansas. You're back at home against the Jayhawks. Got beat up down in Arrowhead last year. Jalen Daniels, if he can stay on the field, is one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12. I forgot to bring him up before, but Devin Neal being gone at running back, that is a huge loss for the Kansas Jayhawks, and how important he was to their offense. We'll be interested to see going into this game against Iowa State, because he ran for like 130 yards in the game. So how will they be able to replace that? And the main one that you're going to be looking at there is a former Iowa Hawkeye in the form of LaShawn Williams, who transferred after, I think, week 3 last year. But again, the receiving core is all new, but having LaShawn Williams back there, I think they brought in another guy in there as well, but I can't remember his name at this point in time. But the receiving core is all new. So that's going to be a very interesting factor in this game as well. But if LaShawn Williams, like, he put up good numbers a couple years ago at Iowa. I'm not saying he's going to be a direct replacement for Devin Neal, but he has experience. He's put up decent enough numbers before. He's going to be a nice addition to what Kansas does on the offensive side of the ball. And last year, they had a bottom 5 defense last year. Kobe Bryant, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the conference, he's gone as well. They're better against the run than they are against the pass. So it's gonna be an interesting game. But again, I think being at home, following a bye, following a loss to TCU, I think Iowa State's going to right the ship and get a win over Kansas. And the final week of the season is on the road against against Oklahoma State, And Oklahoma State's coming off a brutal season last year. They finished 3-9. They finished 0-9. They started the season 3-0. They finished 0-9. They lost every single game in conference play. I do not believe that Oklahoma State will be as bad as what they were last year. That was like a blip in Mike Gundy's tenure at Oklahoma State. It's an absolute blip. Alan Bowman is finally gone from there, and they are in the midst of a quarterback battle. I haven't seen if they've announced a star, but Zane Flores was the early favorite to take the starting job from them. But you also got House Hejny in there, who's a transfer from TCU. And you also got Banks Bowen, who I believe is a true freshman. So again, Zane Flores being a sophomore, he's never really seen any action throughout his time in college football, but he's the favorite. And again, if they've announced an official starter, I'll put it on screen somewhere, but he's the favorite from what I have gathered up to this point. Now, replacing Ollie Gordon will not be easy, even though he did have a down year, but they did bring in some decent players in the transfer portal, which I think is massive, especially at the receiver position. But the defense got to improve. They gave over 500 yards a game last year. It was like the worst in the conference by a country mile. Like, it wasn't even close. But again, I have a really hard time believing they're going to be as bad as what they were last year. And they brought in 19 transfers on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, not all 19 are going to start, but again, they're not going to be they're not going to be 3-9. I'm not sitting here saying they're going to be 10-2 or anything like that, or challenge for a Big 12 title, but they can't be that bad. But with that being said, Iowa State, I still think, has enough in the tank to beat the Cowboys. So my final record prediction for the Iowa State Cyclones this season is 9-3. I think that's my best record to date for Iowa State. I could be wrong. I can't remember what I had from them last year, but there's a couple games in there that I've flipped back and forth on. I think 9-3 is what the record will be, but I struggled with like the Arizona State game, the Colorado game, the Iowa game, the Kansas State game. Like if they beat Kansas State, I'm going to wager a bet they're going to lose to Iowa. That'd be my guess. And this is me being as unbiased as possible. We'll do the Iowa season preview next week, so make sure you subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below as well on what you think Iowa State season is going to look like, and give your thoughts on what the Iowa's preview and the UNI preview could look like as well. And with that being said, make sure again to check out all the links down in the description below as well, all the different social media accounts, the podcast, all that great stuff. I had a podcast with my friend Brady. We did a whole college football season preview, a 2-hour-long show. You can check that out down below, but the mics weren't working, so it doesn't sound the greatest, but hey, it's still fun listen. I would very much recommend you do that if you just ignore the sound quality. But with that being said, I've been Logan Blackman. I hope you enjoyed. College football is back. Can't be feeling better. And I will see you guys later. Peace.